What's going on, everybody? Happy Friday. Sam Shapiro back here with more of your Heat latest on FanArc. Don't forget to drop a like on this video and, of course, subscribe to our channel for great daily content, all pertaining to your Miami Heat right here Monday through Friday. Andrew Wiggins is here to say. That's what sources, including Brent Siegel, are now saying, at least in terms of the rumor mill surrounding Andrew Wiggins potentially going to the Lakers in some sort of trade for, it was kind of rumored, Dalton Connect. Rui Hachimura was kind of in the mix there as well, but Miami being very adamant about draft assets in that deal, and I think that's why now sources confirming it's all just rumors, and Miami is pretty set in stone on at least keeping Andrew Wiggins in the 305 for the foreseeable future, at least at this point in time right now. Now, more reports I was seeing said right now the Heat don't hold much of a deal to trade Wiggins and are operating under the mindset of waiting to see how things play out during the first few months of the regular season. That's what sources are obviously saying, and I think that's completely logical. I think that's a very smart move, especially because of how high Miami was on having Wiggins stay in Miami over the course of this offseason. And I think that if they want to at least give him the potential to reach that ceiling that I had kind of been talking about, I hope he hits, where he's at least a 20-point plus per game scorer on Miami so far. This is going to be at least the best case scenario to kind of let that all play out and hopefully see if he can develop. Miami has held a high asking price for former first overall picks, or for the first overall pick, excuse me, one that the Lakers haven't been willing to meet, and a lot of that including, obviously first round draft assets in addition to players like Dalton Connect kind of in that mix. So again, I just think this is a very logical move by Miami, especially being high and mighty on keeping the veteran player and former first overall pick in the 305. If they really want to see what potential they could potentially tap out of him, I think this is the best scenario to do it. However, if we kind of see a scenario like we've seen with Terry Rozier, where comes from a team where he's averaging nearly just about 20 points per game, comes in, starts averaging around 10 points per game. I mean, I don't see Andrew Wiggins averaging 10 points a game on Miami. I see him performing a little bit better at a better clip in terms of how many points he's able to put on the board for Miami. But I just think that if they want to let the scenario play out, see how he's going to develop with the team, I think this is kind of the best way to go about it, and then maybe revisit trade talks in a couple months. And if it's not necessarily a Cinderella glass slipper fit like the organization was hoping for, then maybe you kind of look at a potential rebuild, shipping off him, kind of as a potential asset that could not just be used in Miami's starting lineup, but assuming you bring another superstar in the next offseason and he's not potentially worth as much money, then using him to kind of build around a potential another superstar type player like Antetokounmpo or John Morant, like I'd kind of been talking about. So drop in the comments what you think in terms of Miami standing by Andrew Wiggins, and kind of now sources confirming that he isn't going anywhere, at least anytime soon, for the foreseeable future. But we'll kind of just have to wait and see how everything plays out, and hopefully Wiggins will use that time to his advantage and kind of prove that he is going to help end more games for Miami in the win column than so in the loss column. And now that kind of brings up the next conversation I want to talk about. Countdown to tip-off 2025. We are just 33 days away from the tip-off of the NBA regular season to get underway. 10 days until media day kicks off, 11 days until training camp starts, and 15 days until the preseason in Puerto Rico starts for the Miami Heat. And I think as a Heat fan, with kind of just some of the recent signings and how, really going about seeing how these pieces are going to ultimately mesh together once the regular season tips off, there's a lot to be excited about, especially bringing in guys like Dane Danger and Gabe Madsen. Those are the two that I'm kind of the most excited to see how they're going to gel with guys like Norman Powell and Andrew Wiggins, as well as some of the cornerstone guys, obviously, like Harrow and Bam. But I really am hoping that Gabe Madsen could potentially become the next Duncan Robinson type player for Miami, in the sense that he's going to be an absolute sharpshooter from three-point land, and hopefully can get some of those shooting numbers that he had in college more consistently up in terms of three-point field goal percentage. The number of threes he was able to make, I think, kind of stands for itself, but in terms of the efficiency that he's shooting at, I'm hoping that he's really going to give us a little bit of a teaser in training camp leading up to the tip-off of the regular season to kind of hopefully be one of those impactful outside scorers for Miami. And then Dane Danger, obviously, Miami has been in desperate need of a physical big man all offseason long, especially after last season ended. And I think Dane Danger could be exactly what this front court needs if how his college game kind of transpires into his play with Miami. Now, again, I'm hoping that guys like Vlad Golden and Nikola Jovic are also going to kind of step up in that regard, because Miami not really capitalizing on trying to look for a veteran seasoned big man to bring in from another team this past offseason. So I'm hoping that if they're not going, since they haven't really expanded where they've been looking for a veteran type of guy, at least in that part of their game, that they're going to really see how the assets they have right now could potentially develop and then add to Miami's success, at least in this training camp into the regular season tip-off type period. So drop in the comments what hopes you're kind of looking up to, as we're 33 days away from the tip-off of the regular season. A lot to be excited about. And I'm especially hoping that those two guys are going to show out and really be focal pieces that Miami can use in terms of generating success going into the tip-off of this regular season. And now I'm going to get into one of the guys I had just mentioned I have pretty high hopes for going into training camp at least. Nikola Jovic obviously had a great summer in the Eurobasket tournament, but if that play translates and he kind of plays above the ceiling that I think a lot of people are maybe expecting that he could play at, is he going to be due for a much bigger extension that people are kind of anticipating necessarily? Because after this season, he's going to be a restricted free agent in the summer 2026, and I know Miami is definitely not going to want to pay some of what estimates are saying, roughly at a 4-year, $60 million contract, because quite honestly, I don't really think Miami has the assets to afford that right now, at least for a guy like Nikola Jovic. So part of me would love to obviously see him be a contributing forward that could average closer to 15, 20 points per game to go along with 7-8 rebounds. That's also a very high asking price considering where he was playing last year. But obviously shooting the ball very efficiently over the course of this summer in the games that he was involved in, and kind of, if it's an improvement from last year, he's definitely going to have some kind of leverage in sparking some sort of extension like that. So in a perfect world, if he sits at least 12 to 15 points per game, Miami could maybe get away with a 2-year, roughly $25 million deal, which is the money they still owe Terry Rozier. And considering they haven't been able to get that off their plate just yet, they could be due for an interesting scenario where Jovic walks and kind of experiments what other teams would want to give him. And we've seen players that Miami has kind of developed, especially over the past 2-3 years, that have really contributed to Miami's success coming off the bench, being deep rotation guys. Gabe Vincent, Max Strus, just two that come off the top of the head, or the top of the dome really, but those are guys that went to other teams and ultimately got a bag, at least from what they were making in Miami. So I wouldn't be surprised if Jovic comes in, balls out this season, and then ultimately wants more money. So I'm hoping that obviously he does come into this season and is a much more talented player and has developed his game a lot more. But I'm hoping that it hasn't developed too much, because financially that might put Miami in a little bit more in deeper waters than they're necessarily kind of looking at right now. So again, I just hope that in a perfect world, he would develop much more than people would like him to, but also not want estimates around $60 million in some sort of contract extension deal. But I think in a perfect world, if they could get a 2-year deal kind of worth what they owe Rozier right now, that necessarily wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Drop in the comments what you think in terms of really what Miami could potentially have to owe him if he ends up coming out this season and ultimately balling out for this Heat squad, especially for a front court that's in dire need of another rotational player. And he could really be one savior type player that contributes to this front court looking a lot stronger, especially as the tip-off of regular season now, like I just said, 33 days away. So fingers crossed that if he decides to absolutely come in and ball out, that it's not going to impact financially Miami's ability to keep him around at least for the long term, in the long term, bigger picture, really. And now moving over to another post, lastly, to a post I had seen on Instagram by Statline. They were kind of ranking the top five, really the top five dirtiest teams, I think they labeled it. The top five dirtiest teams in the NBA over the last 10 years. And this was kind of an interesting list. They kind of used the statistic of based on fines and suspensions from, fines and suspensions in the grand scheme of things. Top five, I'm going to just round out Miami being number one on that list, which I found rather surprising. They took the number one spot because they had 295 fines and 15 suspensions across the, really across the team. And coming in at second was the Nets with 340 and 3 suspensions, the Grizzlies with 358 fines and 10 suspensions, the Rockets with 481 fines and 13 suspensions, and then lastly the 76ers with 370 fines and 5 suspensions. So I think because Miami, it's also interesting, Miami also ranking having the least amount of fines out of those 5 teams. Kind of, when I initially saw this list and I saw Miami at number one, I was kind of like, how could you say Miami is a dirty team just based on fines and suspensions, especially when the number one ranked team has the least fines out of any of those teams that are kind of mentioned on that list. And I think it's just a lot of it kind of alludes to the nature of the gritty definition surrounding Heat culture, and how despite not necessarily being a top 3 team going into the playoffs multiple years, especially over the last 5 years, they've kind of built this reputation that they're gritty and that they're, not just tough, but they're also kind of, they're willing to just kind of play hard-nosed basketball and really get in your face. And maybe that's why I kind of think they got this label of being a dirty team considered in the grand scheme of things. When I looked at this list, I pictured the playoff game with Jimmy Butler going at Grant Williams, getting in each other's faces, mouthing off to each other, and then Jimmy Butler kind of letting his game speak for himself. But drop in the comments if you agree with this list, because personally I don't. I don't really think Miami is the dirtiest team in the NBA, really, because in the other part of this list, they also obviously they tie for the most suspensions out of this five list team, or excuse me, they have 2 more than the second highest ranked team in this list, the Rockets being 13, Miami then having 15. But I think it's also interesting because, yes, obviously they had the most suspensions. They had the least most fines again. So I don't necessarily think that should plateau them as the most dirty team in the NBA over the last 10 years. And I think this list is a little bit of an exaggeration just because Miami, a bit of a hard-nosed team that's willing to dive on the floor for loose balls, slap the hardwood when they're playing defense, and ultimately just a really, really gritty team. So maybe that's why they at least got a label from Statline for being a dirty team, but I wouldn't say they're the most dirty team in the NBA. I think that's a bit of a hot take, but that's going to do it for this Friday's episode of Your Heat Latest here on FanArc. Don't forget to drop a like on this video, and of course, subscribe to our channel for great daily content, all pertaining to your Miami Heat right here, Monday through Friday. Thanks again so much for joining us. I'm Sam Shapiro. Have a great weekend.